is a war. It's happening now. It will decide the fate of humanity. The time to choose sides has come. We are the resistance. We are the InfoWar.
Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. It is Tuesday, September 16th, 2014, and I'm Leanne McAdoo. Here's tonight's top stories.
Tonight, Obama pledges 3,000 troops to fight the Ebola threat. Then, the crackdown on Christians in Saudi Arabia. And McCain's mad that others don't hang out with his terrorist friends. That's next on the InfoWars Nightly News.
Meanwhile, John McCain, if you believe it, with real Al-Qaeda, with the Al-Qaeda Brigade, it's actually called the Bin Laden Brigade, that leads the Syrian forces.
Obama has announced there will be boots on the ground after all. Now, of course, the enemy that the president has sent our troops without hesitation to go fight is the Ebola virus. Now, the U.S. has pledged 3,000 troops to West Africa, including engineers and medical personnel, to build 17 treatment centers with 100 beds each. They're going to train thousands of healthcare workers and establish a military control center for coordination of the relief effort, of course. Now, Obama's announcement marks his second within a week of new mission for the U.S. military. This was following last week's speech outlining a broad escalation of the campaign against the Islamic State militant group in Iraq and Syria. So once again, we have a humanitarian crisis that the U.S. must rush to solve. And of course, since it's for humanitarian means, the U.S. has a moral high ground. But we all know this is about getting a backdoor into Africa. Even after all of these years of exploitation, this is a country still rich in natural resources and so much more. Just like we saw with Iraq and Afghanistan, basically, what they're wanting to do is Syria, destroy this country in order to save this country. And let us just remind you that on the top of the Bilderberg agenda for this year was Africa's challenges. So we knew we would be seeing a lot more presence by the globalists in that country. So here we are with all of these headlines. So Obama is saying that he wants to send troops to help counteract this humanitarian crisis there in West Africa. But what about the crisis at our own border? Now, depending on who you ask, there is no threat at the border. This is what's being spouted off by the Department of Homeland Security. They say there is no credible intelligence to suggest that there is an active plot by ISIL to attempt to cross the southern border. This is according to the New York Times. It was declared in a written statement by Homeland Security officials. Now, here Nimmo points out that Democrats are attempting to spin the warnings issued last month by government insiders. We reported that in August, Judicial Watch cited high-level sources in the federal government stating ISIS would cross the border very soon and launch attacks. They had very high-level government insider sources saying that they were hearing radio chatter, but that is actually kind of a bingo point there. Here, if you go directly to the New York Times article, what the New York Times reports is that Democrats say opponents of President Obama are simply just playing on concerns about terrorism as part of their attempt to portray Mr. Obama as having failed to secure the border against illegal immigration. And there it is. Aren't the president and his fellow Democrats doing the exact same thing, except for downplaying the threat of terror because they want to pass immigration reform? So they're accusing the right of upplaying the terror. They're downplaying it because they really need to just go ahead and, after November, pass this sweeping immigration reform. And once that happens, then they can go ahead and ramp up the terror threat at the border because, as Rob Dew mentioned earlier on the radio show today, they're probably just going to go ahead and do away with the border altogether, and then this will give them the excuse to terrorize us in the streets with MRAPs and heavily armed police force because it's for our safety. Now, one of the top liberal talking heads, Cenk Uygur, he is of the Young Turks. He says that he would bet money on Rand Paul becoming the next president of the United States. That's right. This is a top liberal voice saying this. He notes that Paul was a voice of reason on the issue of ISIS, saying that the Kentucky senator's opposition to bombing Syria, arming so-called moderate rebels, and intervening in the region stood in stark contrast to Hillary Clinton beating the war drums in line with establishment Republicans. Now, Hillary Clinton has repeatedly floated the erroneous talking point, one that's echoed by Rhino Republicans, that Obama's failure to arm the Syrian rebels during the first phase of the uprising was what led to the emergence of ISIS. Now, we know in reality, ISIS grew in strength as a result of being bankrolled and armed by America's closest allies, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Jordan. Now, in addition, many of the weapons that were sent to FSA rebels were also seized by ISIS fighters. But hey, Hillary Clinton, she's going to go on this campaign to just say, let's keep on doing the exact same thing that we were doing and hope this time it works. And I'm not talking about arming the rebels. I'm talking about voting for a Clinton again, or a Bush for that matter. Now, indeed, just how will the U.S. decide which of the rebels are the good guys? Now, Congress is expected to vote this week on giving the Obama administration the authority to combat the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria by providing arms and training to someone, but whom? And there are vast differences among Syrian rebel fighters. It's a conglomerate of varying ideologies, social backgrounds, and loyalties. And the questions of who exactly is a Syrian moderate and whether these weapons will fall into the wrong hands loom large on Capitol Hill. A senior fellow with New America's International Security Program said one of the problems is that whether or not someone is fighting under an Islamic banner or a Syrian revolutionary flag, they're often working together on different fronts. If they're fighting to take over the military base or airport, different groups ideologically predisposed will be fighting together. And that's exactly what we've reported before. Rebels admit that they are working with ISIS. They say they have all the money and the power in the region, so of course they're working together. And this is an old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that is why voting to fund the rebels without a clear indication of who is with us is impossible. And of course, this is why Obama is so ever so thankful for those beheading videos, because he says that it's got unprecedented support, which will help Congress go ahead and give him what he wants on Thursday. But joining forces is exactly what's happening. Here we have a report saying powerful al-Qaeda branches in Yemen and North Africa have issued an unprecedented joint statement Tuesday calling for jihadists in Iraq and Syria to unite against the common threat from a U.S.-led coalition. They urge their brothers in Iraq and Syria to stop killing each other and unite against the American campaign and its evil coalition that threatens us all. And we have reports also of Syrian rebels and ISIS signing a non-aggression agreement in which they promise not to attack each other because they share a common enemy, and that is the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad and his Alawite regime. So it's okay to arm them because we all have a common enemy, right? We want to take down the President Assad there in Syria. But they just kind of want us to forget that eventually we're going to have to then go ahead and fight them, ISIS and all these other rebel groups, to get them out of the way so that the West can do whatever it has planned for the region. But we're not, and when I say we, I mean the government there. I don't mean me, but we're not so great at figuring out who is our enemy. Who is our friend? I mean, basically, it all comes down to money and politics. Consider this. In the past month, a group of radical Islamic extremists based in the Middle East have beheaded at least 23 people, and they've enforced a ban on Christianity by arresting a group of people for practicing the faith in their private home. Now, I am not talking about ISIS, but it's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, one of America's closest global allies. Now, of course, the West, they want to hype up their anti-Christian bigotry and their humanitarian issues when it suits them and their status quo message. But the true driver of U.S. foreign policy can be summarized with just two words: corporate profits. Now, just look at some of these headlines. Saudi Arabia passes new law that declares atheists as terrorists. Meet the U.S. allies. Saudi Arabia passes draconian medieval laws to crush dissent. Saudi man receives 3-year prison sentence and 450 lashes for being gay. Saudi human rights lawyer and activist jailed for 15 years for free speech under new anti-terror law. And of course, what's all in the news right now is 2 congressmen pushing for the release of a 28-page document showing Saudi involvement in 9/11, and of course the ties to the Bush family as well. Now, this article is reporting that 28 people were rounded up Friday by hardline Islamists in the region, and this was all for practicing Christianity in the privacy of a home. There are millions of Christians in that region, but Saudi Arabia is the only nation state in the world with the official policy of banning all churches. This is enforced even though there are over 2 million Christian foreign workers in that country. Saudi Arabia doesn't tolerate public worship by any other religion other than Islam, and they systematically discriminate against its Muslim religious minorities. They don't allow political or human rights associations, and despite all of that, Human Rights Watch notes that Saudi Arabia is a key ally of the U.S. and European countries. The U.S. didn't publicly criticize any Saudi human rights violations except through annual reports, and some members of the U.S. Congress have expressed skepticism about Saudi's policy priorities, but the U.S. concluded a $60 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia, which is its largest anywhere to date. Now, this is from the Washington Post, and you can see in the article right there, Secretary of State John Kerry meeting with the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Now, they say that long an incubator of the Salafist ideology that is now inflaming the Islamic State and militant groups like it. The kingdom has grown increasingly concerned with the destabilizing chaos that IS has wrought in their region. So they basically share the same ideology. But this doesn't mean that its state ideology is necessarily changing. The country is notorious for its draconian laws, which are derived from a strict Wahhabist interpretation of Islamic doctrine. Saudi Arabia is conspicuous in being the sole country to regularly carry out beheadings. Beyond the grisliness of the method of punishment, observers are also point to the unjust ways in which those who face death penalties are found guilty, saying the execution of people accused of petty crimes and on the basis of confessions that are extracted through torture has become shamefully common in Saudi Arabia. But here we have Secretary of State John Kerry right there, walking right alongside our closest ally, one of our closest global allies. It's not about humanitarian issues. Here we're pointing out that Saudi Arabia is more extreme than ISIS. They've beheaded more people than the 2 journalists that we've seen in the videos that ISIS has released. But Saudi Arabia is our closest ally, and it all comes down to money, corporate profit, and greed. And perhaps, of course, that's why John McCain was trying to spin his visit with ISIS last year, where we had pictures where he was like hand in hand with the extremists there, because he's basically saying to know these extremists and to have met with ISIS, that's a good thing. Any potential presidential candidate should be able to claim that they have met with terrorists, much like Secretary of State John Kerry is meeting with them in Saudi Arabia, because our closest allies are there helping us in our reign of terror across the globe. Now, coming up, Paul Joseph Watson is going to be joining me via Skype to break down this story around McCain as well as many others. And of course, the threat of Ebola requiring boots on the ground. Stay with us.
Celebrate the spirit of freedom and liberty upon which our nation was founded at InfoWarsShop.com. Molon Lave is ancient Greek for come and take it. This popular design combines both classic Greek Spartan imagery with modern M16 assault rifles. Now available in women's tees and proudly made in the USA. Celebrate the spirit of 1776 with the George Washington brass belt buckle or this incredibly sharp-looking 1776 hat. Badass. And be sure to check out the new arrivals at InfoWars Life, where you can prepare your body to perform at peak levels with Survival Shield Nascent Iodine, Super Male Vitality, and Fluoride Shield. And Wake Up America Immune Support Blend is the healthy choice for the gourmet coffee lover. So get incredibly high-quality, freedom-based products